She said it softly, like a confession too heavy for daylight. The saloon had gone quiet, though the piano still trembled on its last chord. "I can't have children," she whispered, her voice barely touching the air between them. And the cowboy, tall and worn like the land itself, just smiled, not the kind of smile men wear for charm or habit, but one slow, deep, and knowing. "Good," he murmured, eyes shadowed beneath the brim of his hat. "I've got enough kids for both of us." But what she didn't know, what no one in that town could have guessed, was that none of those children were alive. Not anymore. He turned back to his drink, amber light glinting off the glass like the last shimmer of hope before sundown. Outside, the wind swept across the empty street, dragging dust and memory through the heart of a town that had already forgotten how to feel. The cowboy had been riding for weeks, chasing silence, running from ghosts that still carried his name. And now, sitting across from her, a woman whose eyes held both pain and defiance, he realized the West had a cruel sense of humor. She was beautiful in a way the world punished. Not soft beauty, but the kind carved by hunger, storms, and loss. A woman who had buried dreams so deep she'd learned to smile above their graves. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her glass, and though her words had been quiet, the weight behind them filled the room like thunder. The cowboy lifted his eyes to her again, studying her face, not as a man studies a woman, but as a wanderer studies a map. Every scar, every flicker of light in her gaze spoke of a past that bled like his own. And for the first time in years, he felt the strange ache of recognition, that feeling when two broken souls find the same melody inside their ruin. He wanted to ask her name, but names were fragile things in the West. Names could get you killed or forgotten. So instead, he asked the question that mattered most. "What's a woman like you doin' in a place like this?" She smiled, slow and tired. "Same as you," she said. "Trying to disappear." The cowboy leaned back, his chair creaking like an old confession. He didn't tell her that he'd once had a wife who said those exact words. Or that she'd vanished into the night with their children after the town turned on him. He didn't say her name, Clara, because saying it would bring the ghosts back. And tonight, he didn't want ghosts. Not yet. He finished his drink, pushed the glass aside, and stared through the window. The moon was rising over the desert, round and pale, like the eye of God refusing to blink. Somewhere out there, the past was still waiting. She rose from her seat and walked toward the door, her skirt whispering against the floorboards. Then she turned, looking back at him with eyes that caught the lamplight. "You coming?" She smiled, slow and tired. "Same as you," she said. "Trying to disappear." The cowboy leaned back, his chair creaking like an old confession. He didn't tell her that he'd once had a wife who said those exact words. Or that she'd vanished into the night with their children after the town turned on him. He didn't say her name, Clara, because saying it would bring the ghosts back. And tonight, he didn't want ghosts. Not yet. He finished his drink, pushed the glass aside, and stared through the window. The moon was rising over the desert, round and pale, like the eye of God refusing to blink. Somewhere out there, the past was still waiting. She rose from her seat and walked toward the door, her skirt whispering against the floorboards. Then she turned, looking back at him with eyes that caught the lamplight. "You coming?" He didn't ask where. Some roads don't need directions, only courage or madness. He followed her into the cold, and the door swung shut behind them with a sound that felt final. The desert was vast and quiet, its silence broken only by the crunch of their boots and the soft hum of wine through the sagebrush. The town lights faded behind them, swallowed by the dark. She led him toward a small shack near the edge of nowhere, a lonely cabin that looked as if it had been forgotten by time itself. Inside, there was only a single candle, a wooden bed, and the faint smell of cedar smoke. She lit the flame, its flicker casting ghosts on the walls. The cowboy stood there, hat in hand, unsure whether to stay or turn back. But something about the way she looked at him, unafraid, unashamed, rooted him where he stood. "You look like a man who's lost more than most," she said. He almost laughed. "You could say that." Her eyes softened. "Then you'll understand." He didn't ask what she meant. Instead, he sat down beside the window, watching the candle tremble. Every shadow on the wall seemed to move with purpose, whispering memories he'd buried long ago, a child's laughter, a woman's cry, the echo of gunfire that ended them both. She began to speak, voice steady but low. "I had a husband once. A good man. Or maybe just a kind one. Doesn't matter much now. The land took him. Took everything." He said nothing. The West was full of stories like that, men devoured by dust and debt, women left behind with dreams that turned to dust. But there was something different in her tone. It wasn't sorrow. It was defiance. "I stopped praying after that," she continued. "Stopped believing in mercy. Figured the world don't owe anyone a thing." The cowboy nodded slowly. "You're right. It don't." She looked at him then, long and hard. "So what do you believe in, cowboy?" He hesitated. The question struck deeper than he expected. Finally, he answered, "Consequences." She smiled faintly. "Good. Then you'll fit right in." Morning came like an apology. The sky bled red at the edges, and the wind carried the scent of rain that would never fall. The cowboy woke to find her sitting by the door, cleaning a revolver that looked older than sin. "You planning on using that?" he asked. "Depends who comes looking." He watched her, something like admiration stirring beneath his ribs. She wasn't afraid of the West, she was the West. Wounded, weathered, and still standing. By midday, they were riding side by side through the desert. The silence between them felt heavy, but not empty. There was an understanding there, two souls too broken for lies. As the sun climbed higher, they came upon an old graveyard, wooden crosses half buried in sand, names worn away by time. She stopped, eyes fixed on one grave at the edge. "That's him," she said quietly. He dismounted, removing his hat. The cross was split, the letters barely visible. Samuel Reed. Beneath it, a second name scratched faintly, Evelyn Reed. "Your daughter?" he asked. She nodded once. "She didn't make it past winter." The cowboy felt the air leave his chest. He wanted to say something, anything, but words were clumsy things beside grief. He knelt, brushing sand from the cross. For a moment, he forgot his own pain and felt hers like it was his own. "I'm sorry," he said finally. She looked down at him, and there was no anger in her face, only exhaustion. "Sorry don't change nothin'. But it's kind." They stood there for a long time, the desert wind whispering through the graves. And for the first time in years, the cowboy didn't feel alone. They rode on, further west, where the land turned wild and the law stopped pretending to care. She said she knew a place, a town without a name, where lost things went to hide. He followed her through canyons that looked like open wounds, across rivers that gleamed like molten glass. Each mile peeled back another layer of silence between them. And then, one night beneath a blood-red sky, she finally asked the question he'd been dreading. "You said you've got enough kids for both of us. What did you mean by that?" He froze. The firelight caught the edge of his jaw, the flicker of his eyes. For a long time, he didn't answer. Then he said quietly, "They're gone. All of them." She waited. "They were taken," he went on. "Town said it was bandits. But truth is, it was my fault. I brought trouble home. Thought I could outshoot fate." He looked into the fire, the flames dancing like memories of faces he'd never see again. "My wife, Clara, she tried to forgive me. She ran when the smoke rose. Never saw her again. Not her, not the kids. Just ashes. The woman said nothing. Just reached out, touching his hand lightly, a gesture too simple for words. In that silence, something shifted. Two broken halves found a strange balance. Days turned to weeks. They became rumors whispered across saloons and campfires, a mysterious pair, the cowboy and the barren woman, traveling west like ghosts chasing redemption. But fate in the west is a circle, not a line. And circles always close. One evening, as the sun drowned in red dust, they reached the edge of a forgotten town, Hollow Creek. The cowboy stiffened at the sight of it. He'd been here before. Years ago. And it was here, under the same sky, that his past had begun to rot. The town looked empty, but smoke curled from a single chimney. The woman noticed his hesitation. "You know this place?" He nodded. "I buried everything I was here." They entered the main street, and the sound of their horses' hooves echoed off the empty buildings. Then, a sound. A door creaked open. A figure stepped out, thin, weathered, eyes sharp as a blade. It was Clara. Older, harder, but unmistakable. The cowboy froze, heart stuttering. She stared at him like she'd seen a ghost, maybe she had. Behind her, two young faces peered from the doorway. Children. He couldn't breathe. The world tilted. Clara's voice was low, almost shaking. "You've got a lot of nerve coming back." He swallowed. "Didn't know you were still here." She laughed bitterly. "Where else would I go? This town died the day you did." The woman beside him, the one who couldn't have children, said nothing. She simply looked at the children, then at him, and understood. "Go to her," she whispered. He turned, but before he could speak, Clara stepped forward, eyes like flint. "You think you can just ride back and everything's fine? After what you did?" He didn't answer. There was no defense for a man haunted by his own sins. Suddenly, from the shadows, movement, men, rifles, the unmistakable glint of revenge. Outlaws, drawn by blood and rumor. The same ones who'd once hunted him. Gunfire split the silence. The woman drew her revolver faster than thought. The cowboy ducked, firing back. Dust exploded, windows shattered, the air thick with smoke and screams. When it ended, the ground was littered with bodies. He turned, and saw her on the ground. Blood on her dress. Eyes fading like sunset. He dropped to his knees. "No, no, stay with me." She smiled faintly. "Told you I couldn't have children," she whispered, voice breaking. "But maybe I was meant to save one." Her gaze flicked toward the doorway, the children watching. He held her as the light went out of her eyes, the desert wind carrying her last breath away. Years later, when folks told the story of Hollow Creek, they spoke of a man who walked into the desert with 2 children and never came back. Some said he built a home by the river. Others swore they saw him riding at dusk, a ghostly figure beside him, a woman with a revolver and a smile softer than the wind. And every night, when the stars came out, the desert whispered their story, of loss, of redemption, of a love that defied even death. Because in the West, some legends aren't written in books. They're written in blood, dust, and the silence between 2 broken hearts.